Okay. Can you just do a sound check really quickly? Can you say hi and just after a sentence or two?
Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Keep going? So.
That's good, that's good. Thank you.
Then I can introduce you. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the national headquarters of the Theosophical Society in America. My name is Ajahn Chandako. I'm the Director of Public Programs. And it is my duty to ask that at this time you turn off your cell phones if you've forgotten to do so. This evening's lecture is being webcast, and so I also welcome friends watching through the internet. Some of you are new to the Theosophical Society. You may want to know that the Theosophical Society promotes study, meditation, and service. We encourage open-minded inquiry into the world religions, philosophy, science, and the arts, and we have a deep respect for the unity of all life. Our goal is to help people explore the spiritual path so as to arrive at a deeper understanding regarding the wisdom of the ages. Furthermore, we feel this wisdom is not limited or restricted to any one tradition, and thus we offer programs from all traditions, as is reflected in our Thursday lecture series. If you have not already received or taken one, I invite you to take one of our program brochures that are out on the little table just out in the reception area there. Also, you can find this listing of programs on our website. I invite you to visit the website and just scroll down under programs, and you'll find that they are listed under different categories, beginning with the Thursday lecture series. But we also have a large number of workshops and events that take place usually on the weekend, and many classes and groups that meet here throughout the week. On our website, you'll also find listed many online courses that are only available through the internet. They're interactive, and many of them are ongoing groups that meet regularly, and some of them may be of interest to you. So I invite you to look through them. We are a membership organization, but everyone is always welcome to come to the Theosophical Society, regardless of whether you are a member or not. Please come as often as you want. Make use of the wonderful grounds that we have here, our library, bookshop, and of course, join in some of the programs that we offer. This evening, I'm very, very happy because I have been inviting Ajahn Chandako to come and visit Chicago for quite a number of years. And up until this year, I had not been successful. So I'm very happy that finally he did make time to come and stop by the Theosophical Society for a brief time, just sufficient to be able to give a talk this evening. I hope that this is only the beginning, and that in the future his visits, you know, it's up to you to make him feel really welcome and appreciated, and then he'll want to come back and maybe stay a little longer. But some of you may know Ajahn Chandako. It is his first visit here to the Theosophical Society headquarters. Ajahn Chandako is originally from Minnesota. He earned a bachelor's degree in religious studies and began applying himself to training in meditation with great interest. He was eventually ordained as a Buddhist monk in 1990 in Thailand in the lineage of Venerable Ajahn Chah. After 20 years of study with Buddhist masters in the US and in Asia, Ajahn Chandako was invited to New Zealand to establish the Vimutti Buddhist Monastery in 2004. And that is his residence, where he's stationed at present as the abbot of that monastery. And he tries to visit America, primarily to visit his family, but also many friends that he has here, and now he has us as his friends as well. This evening he will speak on the Buddhist teachings of non-self and the illusion of free will. Please join me in welcoming Venerable Ajahn Chandako.
To begin with, I would like to just establish the mood, establish a continuity of awareness, just by bringing awareness into your posture. Just a brief meditation. If you're sitting on a chair, just bring awareness into the posture of sitting. Take a deep breath. Feel the sensations of the air coming into your body. With your eyes closed, where can you feel your body? Do you notice pressure on the seat, your feet, the feeling in your arms? Bringing awareness into the body becomes our anchor for continuity of clear attention in the present moment. When we're clearly aware of our body, our posture, the movement of our bodies, sensations throughout our bodies, we notice this gentle rhythm of sensations caused by the air flowing into the body and flowing out. Each breath unique. Each breath interrelated with our thoughts, moods, perceptions, with the condition of our body. Developing a continuity of clear awareness in the present has the natural effect of being very calming. The breath is always with us. And sometimes just taking 15 seconds, close our eyes and be mindfully aware of 3 breaths fully coming in and going out. Helps us to connect with that sense of serenity that sometimes we lose touch with. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. Thank you all for coming this evening. Thank you, John. It's been a pleasure to reconnect after all these years. We knew each other in Thailand back in the old days, but it's been 25 years since we've seen each other, so there's been a few things to catch up on. Tonight I would like to talk about what is, I would say, the essence of what differentiates Buddhism as a teaching, or the Dhamma, the teachings of the Buddha, from other spiritual traditions, and that is the doctrine of non-self. Now, if you look at Buddhism in a nutshell, if you want to talk about how to encapsulate the Dhamma, very briefly, you could say it is doing the wholesome, being a good person, developing the wholesome. That leads to the serenity assisted by meditation, which is then a foundation for developing wisdom. So ultimately, the idea is for developing wisdom, insight into the nature of reality. But the truth is, we can't just jump into it. Right? It's not an intellectual exercise. No matter how much we read, no matter even if we agree with everything that's written in the Buddhist sutras, to realize it for ourselves, to see it for ourselves, takes a bit more work. Right? It takes insight based on clear seeing, which is then part of a whole lifestyle. If it was a matter of just reading, thinking, contemplating, and then wisdom would develop, that would be a much shorter path. But for it to really sink in, for the wisdom of the Buddha, the wise words that we might read and be inspired by, if those are going to really sink in, then it needs to be assisted by a deep internal peace. An internal peace. And that is only going to come through a whole lifestyle. It's not just a meditation technique that we can develop, but it's based on a life of developing goodness, wholesomeness, not harming, being kind, forgiving, patient. Go on and on. So what I'm going to talk about tonight is more like the end of the path. There are certain aspects of developing wisdom that are not meant to be an intellectual exercise, but gradually through practice and a certain inquisitivity, having a certain sincerity in really wanting to understand life. Then we start to look at certain patterns in our lives and essentially what leads to happiness and what doesn't. Right? It really comes down to that. Ostensibly, we all do what we do because we want to be happy in some form. however we conceive happiness, satisfaction, you know, we want to be happy. But then why is it that when everyone wants to be happy, there's still a lot of suffering in the world? Right? You don't have to look to far-flung corners of the world to see suffering. We can see it on our own family, in our own minds, in our own life. You know? Even if it's simply the lack of perfection. We may have everything we need to be happy, but what is it? Why is there, you know, still like missing something, or still feel dissatisfied? What is it? So the teachings of the Buddha gives us a wide range of tools, you know, part of which is to be able to investigate, you know, use our intelligence, use our inquisitive nature, you know, to kind of look at our lives and see what we're doing. But it's impossible to really get a clear idea of how we are living, you know, to understand our life if our minds are scattered. If our minds, even if we want to take a close look at each moment of the motivations arising and passing away, what is really motivating us? If our minds are constantly being scattered, can't focus, restless, dull, not very clear, then it's difficult to see anything clearly. It's difficult to really understand. So this is where meditation plays a central role in helping to train the continuity of attention, moment by moment. Not just sitting with our eyes closed, but throughout the whole day. In the time of the Buddha, there were many doctrines. It was a fertile time of philosophy and religious experimentation. A lot of different approaches to meditation, a lot of different approaches to liberating consciousness or seeking the true self. So the Pali word, you know, Pali is the ancient language of the Buddha in which the earliest Buddhist scriptures are recorded in the language of Pali. And in Pali, the word for non-self is anatta. So to understand why this was such a radical teaching is that in the time of the Buddha, people were seeking the true self. You know? It was, there were many, many different spiritual traditions. Most of them were seeking what is the true self, trying to experience that or purify that in order that the true self would then be unified with the ultimate. And this was considered liberation. So those people who had some insight in all traditions at that time, they could see, well, the body's not truly oneself, right? You know, that's changing all the time. And even our thoughts and moods and perceptions, those are changing all the time. That's not really who we are. But somehow beyond all of that, beyond these layers of personality, lies our true self. You know, somewhere inside or maybe around or somehow based on these other factors of what we identify with is our true self, the pure self, and then this would then be unified in some way with the ultimate. So the Buddha, through his own investigation, very careful analysis with a mind trained in deep meditation, then came to the conclusion that there is nothing that is not in a state of flux or change. And if everything is constantly changing, whether it's physical or mental, then there's nothing on which you could base an idea of a true self. If you think of the true self as something which is unchangeable, immutable, pure, you know, that will not arise and will not pass away. You know, it's like our true self. And that would be something that would be safe to identify with. Right? You could identify with that. And then if you're able to scrape away all of the external layers of the things that we identify with but are not our true self, then you'd be able to experience the true lasting happiness. So the radical teaching of the Buddha was that actually when you take away all the various layers, there's nothing left. It's like the layers of an onion. You keep peeling away layers and you get down and peel away the last layer and there's nothing there. And he found that the belief or if there's a very strong belief in this idea of a true self, then that can be an obstacle, for insight. But all of these teachings on non-self are to be realized through one's own personal experience. In Buddhism, believing in a doctrine is not very important. Whether you believe in something or you don't believe in something, that's not the key factor. Key factor is, have you experienced this? Have we experienced this in our own life, and to what degree? So bound up with this idea of a true self is the idea of somehow in here there is a person, somewhere, someone, something that is making the decisions in our life. You think of all the things that we identify with, well, you could take away a lot of that, but still there's the idea that we're the ones who make choices in our life. We're the ones who have the ability to choose whether we want to do something this way or that way, whether we want to develop the wholesome or the unwholesome, whether we want to go or stay, right? There is that sense of something is making the decisions. But if there's ultimately no true self, then what is that? Now this also is bound up with the doctrine of karma, or in Sanskrit, karma. Now the way the Buddha describes this is that it's certainly not a doctrine of fatalism or determinism. It is a doctrine of cause and effect, and all things in the universe being intertwined, leading all the past history of the universe has led up to this present moment. And then we have a choice in how we respond. Assuming there are no other factors influencing us, then we have a choice on how we respond. Now, if we're not very mindful, we tend to respond just according to habit. But if we're very clear, then if something happens, then we can choose how we respond, and we have enough time to think, what is the wise response to any particular moment? So the way the Buddha described the law of karma is a very dynamic one, right? So there's this interaction each moment, and we literally then create our future based on our present intentions and motivations. But in Buddhism, this idea of right effort and this making right effort with each moment is assuming that there is someone who is making decisions. Assuming that there is someone who is making the decision to be nonviolent rather than violent. Making this decision to be helpful and kind rather than to be cruel and greedy, right? Right? So it's bound up with this law of karma. And yet ultimately, if we look very closely at it, then the whole idea of free will starts to fall apart a little bit. So let's look at the idea of free will. When we're talking about free will and lack of free will, there are certain levels on which we normally operate. Now, the first level is if we're really not very mindful, if we're really living a bit of a blind life, and we all do that sometimes, then let's say something happens and we just respond according to habit, right? Someone says something that we don't like and anger arises and then we say something back, right? We just blurt something out, or something happens that we like and then we just respond and we grab it and grasp it and try to hold on to it. So in this way, even on a conventional level, there's very little free will, right? In just observing our own life, observing the lives of others, we can see a lot of society, a lot of actions in society are merely functioning on this level. There's not a lot of clear awareness necessarily on what we're doing, what other people are doing. I'm just kind of operating on a bit of a blind habit. So there's no real free will there. It's a bit of a robotic life. Like someone pushes a button and we respond in a particular way. Push a different button and we respond in a different way, right? And especially the people we live with who know us best, they know all our buttons. They can push all our buttons whenever, get us to respond however they want. So, but on another level, let's say we work to develop a continuity of clear awareness, right? And this is why so much attention is given to this idea of mindfulness. Now, mindfulness, in Pali it's called sati. Mindfulness is not the be-all and end-all of Buddhism or spiritual practice, even though it's gone very mainstream. It is simply one factor of the Noble Eightfold Path, but it is the key factor. It needs to be there with all of the other factors. It needs to be there every moment throughout the day, if possible. Right? So mindfulness is clear attention, clear awareness. So I use these words interchangeably: mindfulness, attention, clear awareness. And this is something that we need to train. We all have the ability to do that. We all have some mindfulness. Animals have some mindfulness. We're conscious, but we have the ability to be much more aware of details than we are. Just sitting in meditation for 5 minutes with simple instructions. Just pay attention to your breathing, coming in and going out. Very simple. How many breaths can you breathe in without your mind wandering? Without distracted thoughts coming in? So we spend a lot of time training in mindfulness. It is something that we can do throughout the whole day, from the time we wake up in the morning until the time we go to bed at night. Every action throughout the day. If we're established in our body, aware of our body, so we have clear body awareness, so we don't just get lost in our conceptual realm. Sometimes we're thinking so much we sometimes kind of forget that we have a body. So it's helpful just to always come back to being aware of physical sensations, the posture of the body, right? So then no matter what we're doing, whether we're sitting, standing, walking, even walking through the grocery store, good, that's an opportunity to be aware of each step. Make that into meditation. If we're standing in line, okay, instead of being irritated, okay, well, let's say we're waiting, but we're mindful of our body, mindful of standing, mindful of the posture. That in itself is peaceful. Or if we're not feeling peaceful, at least we're aware of what's going on. So with every action throughout the day, we can find ways to train. And the Buddha was very practical when he was talking about the development of mindfulness. It's very simple things like reaching out, lifting, just being in contact with your body. So if we're not mindful, let's say I'm not very mindful right now, kind of playing with my phone, thinking about something, maybe having a conversation, and then I'm thirsty and I just reach over and, it's like there's not a whole lot of mindfulness involved in that act. But it doesn't take any more time to be fully aware of, oh, there's a sensation of thirst arising. Then there's the intention to reach out. You feel the weight of the glass, the coolness of the glass, the sensation of water, the pleasant feeling of gratification, intention, motivation to set it down. Right? And when we do that, then we tend not to spill the glass of water so often. We tend not to forget where our keys are so often. We tend to just pay attention. And when we pay attention to all the little details of life, then it has many practical benefits, but also then we start to become much more aware of what's motivating us throughout the day. And this is where it really, you really start to get some more profound benefit from it. Because thoughts and moods are motivating us throughout the whole day. Sometimes we do things and we don't understand necessarily why. Why is it that we do what we do? Sometimes we're motivated by wholesome things, which is good. We want to help people. We want to be kind and supportive with other people. But sometimes we do what we do because we're motivated by fear. And if we're motivated by fear, then usually the results aren't so good. Or sometimes we're motivated by anger. Sometimes we're motivated by greed, just wanting more than we need. Sometimes we're motivated to do things that actually are harmful to other people. But if we're not clearly aware of what's motivating us and the effect it has on other people, if we don't have clear awareness, then our attempts at developing happiness tend to be hit or miss. Sometimes we luck out and it works out. Sometimes sometimes we make a mess of things. Even if we say we have good intentions, right? We're not really closely paying attention to all of the different layers of intentions and the refinement of intentions. What's really motivating us. So when we develop this clear awareness, throughout the day, then when a thought arises, say, okay, well, it's just a thought. We're aware of that. When a desire arises, we say, okay, well, that's a desire now, and then we can choose whether we want to follow it or not. We're not like a slave. If we don't have mindfulness, then a desire arises, then it's like we have to do it. We have to fulfill it. With the idea that, well, if we fulfill our desires, then we'll be happy. So mindfulness is very practical, but the more we develop it, it always comes back to developing a very deep self-understanding, and then ultimately questioning the nature of a self altogether. So back to a different level of free will. Let's say we are very mindful. We're very mindful and something happens, and again, someone says something that we don't like. They criticize us. It's like painful, and we want to say something back, and we're feeling angry, and it's like, well, I'm aware of the anger. I feel the anger. I know it's present, and I know, I'm fully aware. I know if I say something, it's not going to have a good result, but we just can't help ourselves. We say it anyways. It's like, oh, forget it. I'm just going to blurt it out and say it anyways. Oh, it feels good. And then we get the bad result that comes from that. Or sometimes there's times where we're aware that, God, if I follow this desire, it's going to have a bad effect. And yet, we can't stop ourselves. It's like it's too strong. It overcomes the power of our awareness. So that's also a level where we don't have free will. Even if we can see that it would be wise to do this, sometimes we just don't have the strength to be able to do that. We're overcome by a range of emotions. So that's another level. But let's assume that our awareness is very strong, and after we've developed meditation, the default position what starts to feel normal is when you have it's like a sphere of awareness around you, and then if a thought arises within that, you can see it. That's just mental energy. Whatever the content, it's just mental energy. You know? A mood arises or emotion arises. It's like, well, okay. There's the emotion. There's also part of the mind which is watching that, and you can see, yes, like experience that, but it doesn't take us over. Right? So then if something happens, we have a greater opportunity to choose, well, what's the wise thing to do in any given situation? Huh? Something happens and then we don't feel like we're a slave to that moment. And we can see every moment we have these opportunities. Things are happening all the time. And then we have the opportunity to respond. We can respond in a habitual way if we want. Sometimes we have good habits, right? And then we respond in a way that we would normally do. But sometimes we have bad habits. I mean, we all have bad habits. And we can keep refining this practice, taking it to deeper and deeper levels. Just watching how we respond in the present moment to certain situations and why. What's really motivating us? You know? Where does it come from? And then we really start to understand ourselves better, and theoretically, then we experience freedom in that moment. And we do. Compared to the other levels that we're talking about, there's a feeling of great freedom. No longer are we just living blindly. No longer are we just subject to following strong emotions. You know? We can choose, you know, what we want to do, what we want to say. We really start to develop an art of living. You know, refine how we speak, say the right thing just at the right time, and you know that's something we can keep refining. You know, as we get older and more experience, and trying to do just the right thing at the right time, not too much, not too little. It really becomes an art. But through all that, there still is this sense of there's someone behind this. There's someone behind who is making these decisions. Right? Or someone who is refining one's life in order to be a wise person, right? In order to be a happy person. And so ultimately in the Buddhist path, then even that which is watching, making decisions, being aware, experiencing good and bad results of karma, then we even have to question, well, who or what is that? Now, in one of the interesting areas in modern times is that cognitive neuroscience is an interesting field of new discovery. There's a lot of pioneering going on in the neurobiology of the brain, understanding the neurobiology of the brain. And so there are increasingly a number of studies that are done to try to understand how the brain is functioning. One of the studies that I recently came across was trying to determine what is the nature of free will. And so they determined a study where the subjects were flashed a letter and then told to either hit the button with their right or left hand. Either would be fine, but as soon as they saw the letter and as soon as they made the decision, then to immediately push the button. So their intention was to create a scenario where there was complete spontaneity possible. There were no external influences. And while they were doing this, they were the subjects had fMRI apparatus attached to them, so they could be getting readings from what was going on in their brain. So while they were doing this, making their completely free decisions, right? Left, right, right, left, whatever they wanted. then the information that was taken from the fMRI machine was then taken, collated, put together. And what they found was that, I think in nearly every case, they could, from the information that was coming from the fMRI machine, they could predict what the person was going to do, right or left, before that person made a conscious decision. So somewhere before a conscious decision had been made, there was neural activity which preceded that, that was measurable, that had already made the decision, but we were not yet conscious, the subjects were not yet conscious of it. And then a conscious thought arose, right or left, and they would push the button, but that decision had already been made prior to them being conscious of making a conscious decision. So that really questions this whole idea. Well, you know, we think we're in charge. We think we're the ones who are making the decisions in our life. You know? If I choose I want to drink a glass of water or set the water down or drink it, it's like, well, yes or no? Okay, well, yes. But no one is forcing me to do that, all right? I'm not overwhelmed by anger or desire or delusion at this moment, or even not even overwhelmed by thirst. You know, I'm not overwhelmed by some cultural conditioning that's forcing me to drink water. It seems, you know, this is just I can choose whether I want to do this or not. And yet, the scientific data seems to indicate that the decision of whether I ultimately pick it up or don't pick it up has been made in my brain before there's a conscious decision available for me to be aware of. So what do you do with that? Then you think, wow, you know, God, is my life, does that mean everything's just determined and, you know, I'm not really in charge of my life? Does that lead back to a fatalist doctrine? And clearly the Buddha said, you know, he denied that was the way things were. It wasn't fate. It's not like everything is just spelled out for eternity, written in the stars, and we're just playing our role. He said, no, it's not like that. You know, there is a dynamic interaction, and clearly there are decisions being made and the results of decisions. You know, we can see that in our lives. Well, then if we look very closely, we think almost every decision I've ever made, you know, when I really analyze it, you know, really look and say, well, what were the causes and conditions leading up to that decision? And then ultimately, of course, I would make that decision, right? Even if it's an unusual decision, like going off to Thailand and being a monk, right? You would think there's not a whole lot of cultural conditioning pushing me in that direction. And yet that decision was made. But even that was, you know, a series of thousands of smaller decisions, each of which was kind of predictable, you know? Each little decision was kind of predictable when you look at the circumstances, and look at the factors very closely. Well, you know, when you take in all the factors, whether it's cultural conditioning, family conditioning, specific personality, mood at the time, you know, our specific mood at the time, you know, how we perceive something, you take in all those factors and then say, well, of course, then the logical result is this decision is going to be made. So this is interesting on one level, more theoretically. You know, theoretically, even if we believe that there is no free will, on a practical daily basis, it still feels like there's free will, and we have to make choices in life, and it feels like, well, if I want to have a practical way to relate to the law of karma with other people and with my surroundings, then I need to continue on as if there is free will. But if we start to look at the whole role of identification, now that's something that also has many practical applications in daily life. I mean, ultimately, the idea of identification with that which is making decisions, you know, is something that can be challenged at some point. But this doctrine of non-self, the idea of there is no eternal, unchanging self, which is making the decisions, or the doctrine of non-self turned as an investigation. It's like, well, what is it that I consider myself to be? And then we start to get into what we identify with, right? And this is a very practical way of developing a more investigative or contemplative meditation. Right? We start at the outer layers of the onion. So what is it that I identify with to be myself? Is it the body? Is it my feelings, memories, perceptions? All of these things that, as a total, we then consider me and mine, my life, who I am. Now, identification would not necessarily be a problem if what we identified with was pure and unchanging. That's why, like, the idea, if you had the idea that there is a true self which is unchanging and pure, and you identified with that, there would be no real drawbacks to that. But if we're identified with things which are changing, then we're constantly experiencing losing things. You know, we're identified with things which are constantly disappearing or ceasing, or falling away. We're constantly losing things, and then that can be painful. That can be difficult, a sense of loss, a regular sense of loss. You know, if we identify with our body when we're young and healthy and strong, and then it changes, there can be a sense of loss. Right? So, if we identify with material possessions, and then we lose them in some way, there can be a sense of sadness, right? You have a really nice car, and someone steals your car, right? Or it's just smaller things, you know, you have a really nice glass, and then someone breaks your glass, right? Ajahn Chah has this famous teaching. It says, you know, view this glass as if it's already broken. That way, no matter what, you know, essentially whatever we identify with, you know, even if we identify with this is my cup, my glass, if we see it as already broken, and we know someday it's going to break, if we see it as already broken, then when it breaks, we're not going to suffer or experience a sense of sadness or loss. So it's usually the unmindful people in the monastery who break the cups, and then they always say, "Oh, it's already broken, Ajahn." Just this past 6 months, I've been on a sabbatical and traveling through Asia, and someone had offered me these very old Japanese teacups. I didn't realize actually how old they were. And so I was having tea in my tent in California with a friend, and we finished with our little California tea ceremony. And then he said, "Oh, I'll wash the cups." And he took them, and one of the cups went, ksh. It was like and he turns to me and says, "It's already broken, Ajahn." It's like, yes, I know. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for the teaching. So when we start to look at what is it that we take to be ourselves, what is it that we identify with? I mean, certainly the body is, of course, you know, this body is who I am, right? How could it be otherwise? When I look at this arm, look at these hands, of course it's my body. But then if there are meditations that we develop which systematically analyze the nature of the body, really contemplate the nature of the body, we really see, well, ultimately, it is just elements that are come together for a short period of time and constantly changing, and then ultimately go back to the rocks and trees from which they came, the dirt and the air, the water. So then, is it really my body? We can identify with it if we want, but it's really no different than the trees and the rocks and the streams. Why don't we say the tree is me? You know, who are you? I'm the stream, I'm the tree. I mean, it's fine if you want to be poetic or a bit spacey, but normally we identify with the body as who we are. Why is that? You know, it's such a strong identification with it. So that perception of this as me and mine is so deeply embedded, it takes a lot of contemplation, you know, systematic contemplation, just to fully start to loosen the grasping around our own body. And then when it starts to change, it's not really a problem. It's just following the laws of nature. You know, when it starts to get older, okay, just following the laws of nature. When it's sick, instead of feeling like something's wrong, I'm sick. So actually, it's pretty normal, right? It's just following the laws of nature. And if we start to see the reality of the body, it helps us then to start to it prepares ourselves, you know, so that we don't get upset when it starts to follow the laws of nature. And in having a body, it's not always pleasant. Sometimes it's unpleasant. Sometimes it's painful. But essentially, it's just following the laws of nature. And if we loosen the bonds of identification a little bit, then we start to experience a greater sense of freedom and release and ease with the body. Right? We're not so upset when it changes, when it gets old, when we don't have the same energy or vigor or beauty that we used to have. It's like, okay, well, it's fine. It's just the body. And then that helps to kind of orient ourselves to investigate, well, what else do I identify with? I mean, we can identify with other people's bodies, right? You know, my mother, my father, my children, my husband, my wife. And so, not even these elements. We start to identify with other elements, you know. And if we identify with something, then there's a natural tendency to want to control it to a certain degree, or think we have the right to control it because it's ours, right? My partner, you know, then we have the right to control what is ours. Right? My children, my parents, whatever that we can identify with, then it's worth looking at. To what degree is it mine? In what way is it mine? Right? If our attachments of mine are very strong, and then things happen that we don't like, then we tend to suffer a lot. That's the problem. That's the drawback. Right? We say, my child, and then our child starts getting up to stuff and doing things we don't like, and then we suffer, right? If that attachment is very strong. So it's, as a parent especially, it's very natural to have strong attachment, but when we look at it more closely, you see, well, even though conventionally speaking, you can say, you know, it's my son or my daughter, but ultimately, still, there's many other factors operating that are out of our control. You just have to let go and allow children to kind of be how they're going to be. When we start to look at our own minds and see what we identify with our own minds, then it really starts to confront this nature of self and who we think we are. That's when it really starts to hit home more deeply. We can kind of get to the point where we see material things and other people, even our own bodies. It's not really mine, ultimately. But then we start to, you know, emotions, our thoughts. You've got to have a brilliant thought. Say, well, we're, you know, really conducive to identifying with that. You know, if a brilliant thought arises, say, what's my thought? It's a really good thought. It's a really good idea. Who's got the best idea? I do. Right? You want to identify with, you know, good ideas. We have a lot of stupid ideas too, and we don't want to identify with those. But, you know, when you really look at the nature of thinking, it's arising according to different causes and conditions, maybe based on what we've read, what we've heard, other things that we've experienced, and then based on all of that, maybe a thought arises. It's just mental energy. But then if we identify with it, especially if we think it's a good idea and then someone else doesn't agree that it's a good idea, right? Then problems can arise. Right? Opinions are the same thing. It's like, you know, opinions, views. Let's say, okay, an opinion arises in our own mind based on how we perceive things. And as far as we're concerned, that's just reality. Yeah, that's just real. We perceive something, we can see it right there, it's very obvious. I perceive it, therefore it must be true, and I develop my opinions based on that. How could anyone who's intelligent have a different opinion? Right? And this is the problem with human society, is everyone has different opinions based on different perceptions. Each one generally assuming that that's reality. Now, the thing is, literally, we live in our individual realities based on our own perceptions, cultural conditioning, the projection of our own perceptions outwards. Rather than there being one ultimate reality that we are perceiving, it's much more accurate to think of it in terms of we have these perceptions which are projected outwards, which create our reality for us, which we tend to assume other people are experiencing as well. But everyone experiences something slightly different and then bases their decisions and their ideas and their opinions based on their reality. And that's how you can have one situation, both people are looking at it and come up with very different opinions about what is the right thing to do. You know? I mean, sometimes one person clearly has more accurate information than the other person, but sometimes it's simply a matter of different perceptions, perceiving things differently. And then, you know, if people don't have this idea of perceptions being not self, then it just leads to endless arguments, right? You see how much difficulty that creates in society sometimes, you know, whether it's, you know, it could be family, a proper way to raise one's children, or it could be proper way to approach society, could be anything to do with politics, right? If we have strong identification with opinions based on perceptions, individual perceptions, believing that to be the ultimate reality, even if we don't phrase it that way, and we just kind of assume that, well, that's real because I perceive it that way, then it's very frustrating when other people don't see it the same way we do. Say, what's wrong? Maybe I just need to convince them, you know, so they see the truth the way I see it. Right? But the reality is, we come from different perceptions, and when we recognize that, it's much easier to get along harmoniously. It's much easier to recognize and empathize with other people and say, oh, well, I see, you perceive it like that. Well, I definitely don't perceive it that way, but I can see how you would come to that conclusion. Or even if I don't fully understand your reasoning to lead to this end result, at least it's fine to disagree. No one is necessarily right or wrong, ultimately. You know? One person believes this based on their perceptions, another person believes this based on their perceptions. If there is not a strong clinging attachment or grasping to the sense of my perceptions, my opinions, my view, these things that we identify with, then it's a lot easier to live peacefully and harmoniously with other people. So there's many practical benefits of investigating what we identify with and gradually loosening the bonds of identification, both externally, but then especially internally. Thoughts, moods, perceptions, and then ultimately that which is being aware. You know, that itself, which is being mindful. That which is watching, being aware, being conscious, making decisions. Then we get back to the whole crux of free will. So I'm going to leave the talk there for now, and then we'll open it up for questions. So I offer this for your reflection this evening. It's meant as a practical way to bring these teachings into our life and test them for ourselves. If anybody has any questions, I'm very happy to discuss whatever you'd like.
If you have a question, please raise your hand and I'll bring the microphone to you. There is already a question from someone who's been listening through the internet. Would you agree that the extent to which we have free will is increased by the extent to which we have made moral choices in the past, and decreased by the extent to which those choices were immoral?
Well, whether our choices have been moral or immoral or based on developing the wholesome or the unwholesome, one can identify with that equally either way. So the sense of the illusion, the degree of illusion of free will, I think is equal both ways. But this idea of free will is very much tied up with our notion of morality. Right? So this is a very good question in the relationship. Now, for example, there was an example that I'd heard before. I didn't make this up, but if you were, let's say you're swimming, you're at the beach, right? And you go swimming in the water and you come in contact with jellyfish and you come out of the water with severe, unpleasant burns on your body. Right? So that is, that's a very unpleasant experience. And normally, you don't come out of the water, even no matter how unpleasant that is, normally you don't come out of the water thinking, I got to call the police, get that jellyfish. I got to call my lawyer, I'm going to sue that jellyfish. Right? Why? Because we assume the jellyfish is not acting out of a sense of bad morals, or we assume the jellyfish barely has any free will whatsoever. But if you're just lying on that same beach, and a person, you're just lying, sunbathing, and suddenly a person comes and spills acid on you, and you get the exact same burn, then you do want to call the police, or you do want to take some legal action to try to get compensation. Why? What's the difference? The end result is the same. Why is our relationship with a jellyfish and a person very different? Because we assume that the person has free will. We assume that the person is not just acting out of instinct, right? That there's an intelligent thinking, a thought process going on that is bound up with morality, and this whole idea of free will and morality go hand in hand in our society. If you really start to question the notion of free will, then how can you punish someone for committing a crime? So it starts to cut into the heart of many aspects of our society. Right? I mean, practically, you still have to assume that people are acting out of free will, or it doesn't mean that it doesn't just give you freedom from taking responsibility. You forget your spouse, you forget your wedding anniversary, and you say, well, it wasn't my choice, it just happened. Or you do something that you weren't supposed to do. You say, well, the decision was made prior to my having any conscious involvement. I really had no free choice in the matter. There's no free will. Ajahn said there's no free will, so I can't be held accountable. It's not that. I mean, there are decisions being made, and then we still have to work with behavior modification, both for ourselves and for others. But ultimately, it does bring into question the whole idea of what is, the idea of morality, good and bad, and the relationship to that with free will, or the whole social justice system that we base our society on, is very intertwined with the notion of free will.
Ajahn, you mentioned the opinions that we tend to form, or what we come to believe is true. And I wanted to ask a question about our tendency to associate ourselves with like-minded people and perhaps avoiding people who hold different views, and whether or not, I guess, what the possible benefits or perils there are in doing that, and how to skillfully choose our associations.
Well, if we perceive something in a particular way and we base our opinions based on those perceptions, then it's comforting when other people have similar opinions. It's like reinforcement that, oh, our perceptions are accurate. Our understanding of reality is accurate. Right? Whether it's in politics, whether it's in religion, right? It's very comforting to have other people agree with us, because it reinforces the idea that, even if we're not fully conscious of it, it reinforces the idea that, yes, I am understanding reality in the correct way. Right? And sometimes that has long-term implications, especially with theistic religions. You're thinking of eternal salvation or eternal damnation. You want to feel comfortable in whatever decision you've made, right? So it feels comforting to have other people who share the opinion. Now, of course, that just because other people share our opinions doesn't mean it's right. Doesn't mean it's correct, right? So it just may be based on insecurity, or the whole movement to try to surround ourselves with people that agree with us could just be coming from insecurity more than anything else. And if we're truly sincere about understanding reality, or even understanding what's best to do in a society, or any political decision that a group might make, if we're really serious about what's best, then it's actually good to challenge ourselves. Right? Certainly in our monasteries, we're encouraged to always challenge our beliefs, challenge our thoughts. Don't just believe your thoughts. It's hard not to. It really takes a certain integrity to say, well, okay, those are my thoughts, those are my opinions, but is it really true, or is it just true? Is it just that I believe it's true? And always questioning, always challenging oneself, right? And look deeper and look at it from a different angle. And we can do that to a certain degree, just ourselves, but we still develop blind spots. All of us have blind spots, just by definition. We're not even aware of our blind spots. And so that's where other people can be very helpful. Other people are like mirrors. They can offer different opinions, different perspectives, maybe that we hadn't thought about. Or sometimes it's as simple as other people become mirrors for our attachment and grasping. The things that we may not like in ourselves, we see very clearly in other people. It's kind of projected out. Or the things that, the places that we're holding very tightly. Or sometimes it's the places where we're really not understanding something very clearly. We very clearly see that in somebody else, and then that can be a mirror for us. So having other people, living with other people can be very irritating, but very useful in general. And and intentionally surrounding ourselves with people who have different opinions, I think helps to get out of that comfort zone. And as long as you're doing it as with the sincerity of wanting to try to understand whatever it is that we want to understand better, then hearing a wide spectrum of different opinions and perceptions has got to be beneficial for that.
Ajahn, with respect to free will, I'm wondering if you view the thinking mind as having aware conscious parts and unconscious parts, like in the sense of like a locomotive, where the engineer would decide how much coal to shovel in or whether to put in good coal or bad coal or wood, and would have a certain amount of control over the output. But once the things have been put in, there's a huge, powerful mechanism that is going to process that in some manner and output, results that, may not be consciously controllable at that point. If you pile the coal in real hard, there's going to be some power coming out of that thing, or if you, put in very light wood, it may be very relaxed later on. I'm wondering, do you see the human mind as having different sections like that?
There definitely are different layers of conscious awareness of thinking. I mean, certainly there's the whole realm of the brain is controlling a lot of the bodily functions without any conscious awareness, any conscious involvement, right? Whether we call that thinking or not, it's still neural activity, kind of directed down that helps to look after our body when we're completely distracted doing something else. Or even if we're fully aware in the present, we may not be aware of all the details that are going on to maintain the body, all the practical decisions that are being made. Whether you call that thinking or not, on some level it's neural activity. And then you have, sometimes there's just endless noise going on in the mind. It feels endless, right? But we may only be aware of a small percentage of that. And those things which are arising, those thoughts, moods, perceptions, fears, desires, those are definitely having an influence in our life and directing our speech and our behavior and what's the direction of our life, right? But we may only be consciously aware of a small percentage of that. And that's when, after years, you think, well, why am I doing this anyways? I've been doing something for years, and think, well, how did I get here? Why am I doing this anyways? And you realize that, well, a lot of the results of what we do kind of came from thoughts, mood, perceptions, fears that were not fully conscious. So we can try as much as possible to develop this vigilant awareness of, every time there's a thought, be aware of it. Every time there's a movement of the mind, be aware of it. And sometimes it's very subtle. But we have the ability to do that. It takes training. But gradually become aware of more and more and more and more, and then the thought process becomes much more conscious, and also it tends to slow down in its productivity. I mean, it slows down in its quantity. It tends to increase in its efficiency. Thoughts will tend to roll on as long as we keep feeding them, especially even if we're not fully conscious of that. We may ruminate over a particular event or a particular scenario, and it just goes on and on and on and on, and with seemingly so much repetition, you think, well, what is there any point in repeating that conversation in our minds that many times? Is that really going to help? Or planning a conversation that we might have in the future. Without grasping, then thoughts arise very briefly and then they disappear by themselves. So the relationship with thought becomes much more peaceful. And a lot of our understanding is not so thought-based anymore. It just becomes based on seeing, clear seeing and understanding, rather than a lot of the verbalization that happens in the mind. Does that touch on what you were referring to?
I'm intrigued by the amount of fear that a lack of self pops up in your head. Have we invented things to protect ourselves from that? Like reincarnation, would that be a protection against that fear of self?
A relationship with the idea of rebirth, certainly, yeah, could be. I wouldn't say that, I mean, in my own case, being born and raised in the U.S. in a non-Buddhist family, I wouldn't say that it's something that I would create or even adopt as a response to fear. But certainly could be used that way, the idea that it just feels comforting that we will continue on rather than cease, right? If you really believe that consciousness is simply a result of the physical brain, then when the brain dies, consciousness ceases and there's nothing that continues on after that. And I believe that that's not the case, but I can't prove it. And so if that was the case, then some people are at peace with that, but other people might feel comforted by the idea of continuing to carry on. I mean, it's certainly the idea of eternal salvation, heaven realms with angels and your family and your dog, that's based on that. Trying to avoid the discomfort of actually facing separation and cessation. I mean, the mechanisms we have for trying to compensate for our fear, they're very extensive, right? And one of the benefits of really looking at what's motivating us is seeing to what degree we are motivated by fear. And it's not necessarily fear of death. I mean, fear of death is a big one, but it could just be fear of other people's opinions, fear of not being accepted, insecurity and worry, those types of fears.
You mentioned briefly liberation, and I wanted to tie that in with the illusion of free will. I take it that liberation, in the sense you're talking about, is free from the constraints or influences of thoughts, the mind in general, emotions, and maybe other physical type influences or forces. So if one was liberated and free from all of that, would they consciously be able to have free will and not any of these preconditions or influences?
Well, the Buddha talked about different levels of liberation. There are, well, even just being mindful gives us a sense of freedom, like a taste of freedom. But then with deeper levels of meditation, it is possible to be radically free of being, the drawbacks of a distracted mind, thoughts, moods, perceptions, temporarily, radically but temporarily freed of all that, liberated from that. And the Buddha did refer to that as a liberation. But perpetual liberation takes an extra step of developing wisdom that then loosens the identification with everything. Right? And then I mean, we're speaking somewhat theoretically here, right? When I was in Thailand, I was fortunate enough to live with many meditation masters and discuss with them. And to a certain degree, I can intuit or imply from their behavior how things are for an enlightened person. But I'm not saying it's coming from my own personal experience. Now, a fully enlightened person doesn't get really weird. I mean, they still seem to make decisions. And yet there is this sense of they're not constrained by their personality. There's still a personality there, you know. The different masters, one may be more outgoing, one may be more contemplative, one may be an excellent teacher, another just only has a few students. You know, there's difference in personalities, but there's still this sense of, it feels like there's no grasping there to this personality, this manifestation of a personality. So even the Buddha, the Buddha would use conventional language, but sometimes he would refer to himself as, he wouldn't call himself the Buddha or I, but he would say the Tathagata, the one who is thus come, or the one who is thus gone. So it's a bit more of a impersonal way of looking at this body and mind. So on a conventional level, there are decisions being made for an enlightened being. Certainly, you know, they still live, you know, they still get up in the morning and make decisions what they're going to do throughout the day. But that which is making decisions is seen as a conditioned process. So the decision that's made is merely the end result of a whole series of causes and conditions, leading to a decision being made and results from that decision. And then at the death of a fully enlightened person, then the whole process of the body and mind cease completely.
So even they don't exercise free will?
I would say definitely they don't even have they fully see through the illusion of free will.
I'm really interested in some more practical advice on how to identify yourself, what makes you tick, you know, what you're talking about, because it's really hard to do. If what you talked about earlier about we act on habit a lot of times now, all our decision makings, and it happens to me all the time. And how do you focus on maybe starting identifying some of the things that make you making these automatic decisions? And then, like you said, you know, the real enlightened Buddhists still have a personality, don't lose their personality, but they can loosen up some of these. How do you practically do that? And I'm not saying, of course, it's years of practice, but how do you start? What are some of the things that we could do today? Mm-hmm. Maybe with a partner or somebody, you know, that you live with are very different from you, so maybe they can help you. I mean, I'm looking for some practical practices that it's a good way to start.
So there's a couple approaches, you know. The Dhamma is so intertwined. I think of the Dhamma like a great bed sheet. No matter which corner you grab, if you keep pulling, you'll pull everything eventually. You get the whole sheet. And so there are many different ways you can approach it. Now, one is just noticing any time that we feel frustrated, upset, or unhappy, unfulfilled, dissatisfied, have mental pain, why are we suffering? If we're suffering, what are we holding on to? Clearly, we must be attached to something. We're holding or grasping onto something that is creating the suffering. You know, what is that? Try to identify that. Right? And so that's a very practical experience. Let's say we're feeling angry and say, well, why are we angry? Because that person said that or did that. So, well, why is that a problem? Because they shouldn't have done that. Well, why do you think they should have done something different? Well, because in my mind I had the idea that it should be done this way, and I thought, okay, well, why am I attached to that opinion? Are you identified or invested in the particular opinion that was threatened? And then you kind of trace it back and keep asking, well, why? Why is that a problem? Or where does the attachment come from? And often, if we trace it back, we can say, oh, that's why. It's simply because, you know, I wanted to be accepted, right? Or simply because I had this fear and I was acting on this kind of insecurity. And if we trace it back and we realize, oh, the problem's not with this other person. The problem's with how we identify with sometimes very small things, but we identify with it strongly, or we just are blind to certain areas where we identify with. And it takes a bit of conscious investigation to kind of trace it back and often say, oh, that's all it is. That's all it is, right? I was just feeling uncomfortable, and that's why blah, 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 led to all this domino effect of getting angry at somebody else. And if we trace it back, we say, all right, I was just attached there. If I let go of that, oh, it's not such a big deal. And then you have the opposite domino effect of relief and freedom and release, and suddenly the problem is not a problem anymore. Now, another way to approach it is just this, finding areas in our life where we just start to train in clear awareness. Right? Now, for example, when you're brushing your teeth, hopefully we all brush our teeth. Let's say we brush our teeth twice a day. And while you're brushing your teeth, then what's going on in our minds, right? Are we thinking about what happened earlier on? Are we planning our day? Are we just daydreaming? What's going on? Huh? And so just pay close attention to all the sensations of the brush and the teeth and the gum, or if there's a thought, then we notice there's a thought and then come back to the physical sensation. You know, we're brushing our teeth. What's the rest of our body doing? You know, we've got one hand, but that's only, 5% of our body. What's the rest of our body doing? You know, total awareness of the whole body. Finding places in our life that we can develop this, practice mindfulness. And if we do that throughout the day, then we start to notice more and more and more. Right? We just become generally more aware, and then when we strongly identify with something, we say, oh, wow, I really identify with that. I didn't notice that before. Or wow, I have that happen. I didn't even notice. You know, maybe you say to your partner, oh, geez, I noticed this habit. Have I done that before? And your partner's like, yeah, you've been doing that for 15 years. You know, of course, you're just being aware of it now, right? So finding areas where we can just train and literally make daily activities into meditation, right? While you're driving, yeah? How easy it is just to drive on automatic, yeah? Be distracted or in conversation or whatever, but just having full awareness while you're driving. You know, learn a lot about ourselves. While we're eating, there's so much that goes on while we're eating. You know, if we just pay attention to every bite, you know, the whole process of eating from beginning to end, preparation, perception of the food, how we relate to the food, the amount we eat, the sensations of the food while we're chewing it, then we can learn a lot about ourselves. And it's hard to predict exactly what we'll learn, but we start to see our thoughts more clearly. We start to see where we identify. We start to see the opinions arising and our grasping to the opinions. You know? So as mindfulness gradually gets stronger, then we recognize, oh, well, I'm grasping on that. And maybe we've been strongly grasping on that for most of our life, but we're just not aware of it. But as soon as we're aware of it, we realize, oh, it's kind of unpleasant. You know, it's unpleasant to really hold tightly onto things. It's unpleasant to hold really tightly onto an idea or onto another person. And just loosening that a bit, you know, it feels more relaxed. And then that starts to become a habit. And just approaching things from a, oh, instead of, you know, there's this idea of if we like something, grasp onto it to make sure that we're not going to lose it because we like it and we want to keep it in our life. But the actual grasping is the thing that tends to kill it. And no matter what we grasp, it's already gone, right? And whatever was wonderful, the perfect moment, you try to grasp it, by the time you grasp it, it's already gone. It's changed into something else. But if we just kind of step back and learn how to live life just accepting, seeing, understanding moment by moment, then it's like, oh, well, that was a perfect moment, but that's gone. I have to let that go. But this moment's pretty good too. And then it's like, okay, well, let that go. And then this, you know, and then this follows by this day and this person and this interaction. And then you realize, oh, it's a much more pleasant way to live life. And it becomes much more clear then when suddenly the mind kind of tightens up with grasping or holding. It becomes so much more obvious. So look for areas in your life where we're really not very mindful, right? If you're at your computer, for example, how much mindfulness do we have of our body? Tension gets so sucked into the screen or the data, the visuals, the graphics, you know, can be so enchanting that we lose touch with our body. We lose touch with our body awareness. So sometimes it's merely a periodic, and maybe every half hour, maybe every hour, you just stop, close your eyes, take 3 deep breaths, bring your awareness into your body. It only takes 15 seconds, but then start again, right? And that's very effective for, you know, if you're working in an office or at a job, and how stress can gradually build, you know? But we're not fully aware of the degree to how much it's starting to build. Other people can see it. They start like, whoa. But if we can just stop periodically, stop. Just take one mindful breath, and it brings us back, settles, and then helps to release physical and mental tension so that we then, you know, it doesn't grow and grow and grow throughout the day. So these are very practical steps that we can take that will, you know, put us more in touch with our body, but more specifically, you know, the great results that come from being aware of what's happening in our minds.
On a rather personal note, can you tell us about your decision and journey in becoming a Buddhist monk? What was appealing to pursuing Buddhism rather than some other religion?
Well, you want the long story or the short story? I think I'll probably have to narrow it down to a shorter story at this point in the evening. The crux of it is that I had no personal choice in the decision whatsoever. And you know, I look back. Okay, I wasn't born in a Buddhist society. I wasn't raised by Buddhists. How did I end up as a Buddhist monk? There were certain cultural influences, you know, like watching Kung Fu as a child on TV. There were certain cultural influences. But then certain other things, you wonder, I don't know where they came from. Like, why is it that when I started off being a political science major, and then I took a course in comparative religions, and out of all the various religions that we studied, somehow Buddhism was the one that really touched my heart. It seemed practical, profound, and I thought, I really want to learn more about this. So then, you know, kind of it was a natural inclination to want to investigate that further. Then, once I graduated, I had the opportunity to do more intensive meditation, actually had the time to do retreats. And then there was other influences where maybe I would just see a picture of a Buddhist monk in a shop somewhere, postcard, and something kind of deep inside me would be like a gong going off, boom. So it just seemed so beautiful or profound or something. It just stirred something, which I don't know where that would come from. Past lives. But, whatever the cultural influences were, it represented something profound and peaceful. And so naturally, I thought, I should try to follow through with that. But even once I started doing intensive meditation and longer retreats, it wasn't like I was ready to dedicate myself to being a monk. Far from it. But after the first long retreat I did, I think, well, someday when I'm retired at 65, maybe I'll be a monk. But the more intensive practice that I did, the more that I saw how life really is unpredictable. You just don't know. You just can't assume that we're going to live to be 80 years old. I can't assume that I'm going to live to a retirement age or always have the opportunity to go forth in the future. And so, well, maybe I should reconsider and maybe become a monk a bit earlier. Future's uncertain. And then, at one point after doing enough meditation, I started to recognize that of my priorities in life, Dhamma practice, or the practicing the teachings of the Buddha, had become the highest priority. And I thought, well, if this is really the highest priority in my life, why don't I just dedicate myself to that? Why am I just doing it part-time? I could try to find a place where I could devote myself to this wholeheartedly. And so from that point on, I really started to look for a community or a monastery where I could practice 100% full-time. And so that eventually led me to Thailand.
And I think that will have to be our last question. There may be more questions, but I will ask that you hold them for a little while, and maybe you can ask those questions in a more informal setting. Because of time, I think we need to end this evening's formal gathering, and before I let you have refreshments, I'm going to take the opportunity to give a few announcements. First one is regarding this Saturday, the workshop that's coming up. It's an all-day workshop on the marriage of heaven and earth, Qigong. And for those of you who are familiar with Tai Chi and Qigong, you know that we have a teacher who teaches here regularly on Monday nights, Don Myers, and he does workshops every season. He does a different workshop. This one is on Saturday. It begins at 10, goes through to 5. It's probably suitable for most people. If you have some experience in Tai Chi and Qigong, that may be very good, but I don't think that it's a prerequisite. Don has been practicing for a very long time. He's been studying in Taoism and Qigong and Tai Chi for 30 years, and he's been teaching for 25 years. So he's a very accomplished instructor, and all his workshops are always well received, and we always get very good feedback. If you're interested in participating, just visit our website and maybe register in advance. That's always a good idea. And one last announcement is on Saturday, July 8th, which is the following Saturday, we have the Interfaith Prayers for Peace, and we invite everybody to come and join in them. It's just an opportunity for people of different faiths to come together in harmony and share something of their faith in a very open setting. If you'd like more information on how you can participate in that, it's a free event. Just go to our website, and there's the person whom you can contact listed there. So they are the events that are coming up. And for this evening, of course, I'm, once again, it's been for me personally, a really, really nice experience to have Ajahn Chandako here for a few days, and we had time to catch up. And he reminded me of the last time we were together, and as he said, 25 years ago. I personally don't remember. However, he did a service for me at that time, because I was a monk at that time, and he reminded me that on that occasion he was massaging my feet, and that's a service. That's, you know, it's given from one monk, junior monk, usually to a senior monk. This evening he has also done a service for me by sharing his experience and his knowledge of the Buddhist teaching from the way he has lived it for so long, and with, I think, a great deal of integrity. And I'm personally very grateful for that, and I hope that everyone here found it maybe inspiring and useful. And I know it's not customary in the Buddhist tradition, but it is here. Maybe a hand of appreciation would be appropriate. So please have some refreshments, and if you do have more questions for Ajahn Chandako, I'm sure he will stay around a bit. Thank you all.